Welcome back to my haunted library, dear listeners. Tonight we turn the page on a tale that's not just disturbing, it's maddening. This is the story of how a life was stolen not just by a car, but by a courtroom. How culture, prejudice, and privilege collided in a West Texas town, and justice got run right off the road. Before we begin, a disclaimer. What you're about to hear is based entirely on factual reporting, court records, and public archives. It is intended for mature audiences and contains themes of violence, injustice, and bias in the justice system. With that said, let's open the case file of Brian Deneke. Brian Deneke was not a quiet soul. With his spiked green mohawk, his punk rock band, and a heart full of rebellion, Brian didn't fit in among the tidy lawns and Friday night football culture of Amarillo, Texas. He stood out, and proudly so. Brian was born in 1978 and raised in a conservative region that valued conformity, God, and football in equal measure. But Brian chose his own path. He was a punk, a real one. He loved bands like The Exploited and the Dead Kennedys. He dressed in combat boots and leather jackets, covered in safety pins. He dyed his hair wild colors and painted slogans on the back of his jackets. He was loud, creative, and compassionate, even volunteering for theater productions and working at a local club that featured underground bands. He didn't try to blend in. He didn't want to. In Amarillo, that meant he was a target. Contrast Brian with Dustin Camp. As senior at Tascosa High School, Dustin was the classic small-town golden boy, a member of the football team, clean-cut, with a crew cut and a conservative wardrobe. He was exactly what the community respected. But Dustin wasn't just a football player. He was also known for having a short fuse and a taste for trouble. On the surface, he represented success and discipline. But under that surface simmered a disdain for anyone who didn't follow the herd. People like Brian. The late 1990s in Amarillo weren't kind to outsiders. Punk kids were harassed. They were treated as freaks, Satanists, or degenerates. They were misunderstood and, worse, dehumanized. Brian and his friends, the so-called punks, were regularly taunted, beaten up, and labeled troublemakers, despite no proof that they were anything but different. They weren't violent. They were artistic, expressive, and that's what made them dangerous to the establishment. Meanwhile, athletes like Dustin Camp were celebrated. When they drank or broke curfew, it was boys being boys. When punks walked down the street, it was a threat. The fuse had been lit long before the night of December 12th, 1997. It was supposed to be just another night out. A punk show at the local venue. Kids with eyeliner and Doc Martens. Music that made you feel alive. But it ended in blood. That night, tensions were high. A verbal altercation escalated in the parking lot of a restaurant. Words turned to shouts. A fight broke out between the punks and a group of jocks. People pushed, people punched, but Brian Deneke was not throwing fists. As the crowd began to disperse, Dustin Camp got into his car, a 1983 Cadillac. He backed it up, then drove straight into Brian Deneke at approximately 50 miles per hour. Witnesses say he yelled, "I'm a ninja in my caddy," before accelerating. Brian's body was thrown over 20 feet. He died instantly. Dustin Camp didn't stop. He fled the scene and later attempted to have his car repaired and repainted to cover the damage. Let that sink in. After mowing down a human being, he tried to erase the evidence like it was a dent in a fender. What happened next is where the true horror begins. Dustin Camp was arrested and charged, not with murder, but with voluntary manslaughter. At trial, his defense team mounted a strategy so revolting it might as well have come from a villain's script. They didn't just defend Dustin, they put Brian on trial. They portrayed Brian as a violent anarchist punk who had it coming. They called him a menace, a thug, and all but said he wasn't deserving of life. His appearance, his music, his identity. They were weaponized against him. Meanwhile, Dustin was painted as a clean-cut young man, a good kid who made a mistake. His lawyer referred to him as a nice boy from a good family and told jurors that he just got scared and panicked. Excuse me, he drove a car into a human being at full speed. It's not panic. That's murder. You want to talk about injustice? This wasn't a trial. It was a cultural exorcism, a punishment, not for the crime, but for daring to be different. And the lawyer, a master manipulator of small town bias, turning mourning into mockery. Dustin Camp was found guilty of voluntary manslaughter. The sentence? 10 years probation. No prison. No jail. Not even a single night behind bars. He walked out of the courtroom a free man. And Brian Deneke? Buried in a cemetery. His gravestone reading, Love, Hope, Peace, and Punk Rock. National media erupted. The story made its way to 60 Minutes, Rolling Stone, and the New York Times. Celebrities like Marilyn Manson and bands like Rancid dedicated songs to Brian's memory. But Amarillo, it mostly stayed quiet. Brian's family never stopped fighting. They spoke out, they gave interviews, they kept Brian's legacy alive, but the damage was done. Dustin Camp, despite killing someone with a car, was free. He even violated probation several times. In 2001, he was finally sentenced to 8 years in prison, not for murder, but for breaking the terms of his original sentence. He served less than 3 years. 3 years. That's what a punk's life was worth. Not the full weight of the law, not even the full weight of probation. Just 3 short years, and the world moved on, or tried to. Today, Dustin Camp lives under the radar. He reportedly changed his name and has worked various jobs, including in aviation and construction. He's stayed largely out of the public eye. He has never publicly apologized to Brian's family. He has never taken accountability beyond the courtroom's forced words. As of recent public records, he is no longer incarcerated and lives in Texas. He is a man who got to grow older, build a life, and fade into obscurity. Brian Deneke will never have that chance. Brian's story didn't die with him. Artists, filmmakers, musicians, and activists carried his legacy. The 2007 film Bomb City was based on his murder, a gritty, painful retelling of how culture war can kill. There are murals of Brian in punk clubs and zines. Bands still shout his name from stages. He became more than a punk. He became a martyr of individuality, a symbol of how dangerous it is to stand out in a world that worships sameness. He was only 19, and yet he left behind a louder message than most do in 90 years. You can't kill a soul with a car, and you can't erase a legacy with a lie. The fire crackles lower now. Shadows stretch long across the library floor. Lady Brian Deneke was not a monster. He was not a menace. He was a young man with green hair and a burning passion for life. And Dustin Camp, he didn't just kill Brian with his car. He helped a town kill its conscience. But here, in the dark, we remember. We speak his name so it won't be forgotten. We tell his story not because it has a happy ending, but because it demands to be heard. Until next time, my friends, stay loud, stay different, and never forget that sometimes the real horror is what happens in broad daylight with a smile and a verdict.